Welcome to Notebook Summaries. Today, we're tackling something huge. We're going to try and condense thousands of years of Indian history into one quick story. And trust me, it's an epic. And when I say huge, I mean it. We're talking about a story that stretches from the very first human footsteps on the subcontinent all the way to the birth of the world's largest democracy. It's this incredible journey, right? Full of rising and falling empires, game-changing ideas, and a culture that has just profoundly shaped our world.
So to make sense of it all, we're going to break it down into 6 key eras. We'll start with the ancient foundations, move into the classical empires, then medieval kingdoms, the Mughal zenith, colonial rule, and finally, the path to independence. All right, let's dive right in.
All right, first up, ancient foundations. We're going way, way back, from the first stone tools to some of the world's most ancient sacred texts.
So get this, modern humans have been on the subcontinent for over 50,000 years. For most of that time, they were hunter-gatherers. But then, something revolutionary happens around 7000 BCE. People start settling down, farming begins, and this completely lays the groundwork for, well, society as we know it. We can even see a window into their world through this incredible rock art, like at Bhimbetka. Some of those paintings are at least 10,000 years old.
Okay, now fast forward to about 2500 BCE, and something truly amazing happens. One of the world's first great urban civilizations just explodes onto the scene in the Indus Valley. We're talking about a society on a massive scale, maybe even 5 million people. And their cities? Oh man, they were marvels of engineering. Think planned street grids, super advanced drainage systems, stuff that was literally centuries ahead of its time.
So, after the Indus Valley Civilization eventually declined, a new cultural force starts to take shape. Indo-Aryan tribes arrive, and this kicks off what we call the Vedic period. This is huge because it brings the Sanskrit language and, most importantly, gives birth to the Vedas. These are these massive collections of hymns and philosophies passed down orally for generations that eventually become the absolute foundational texts of Hinduism.
So with that deep spiritual and cultural groundwork laid, the stage is set for India's first great empires. This is an age of unification, but also of incredible new ideas that would end up spreading all over the world. After a time when everything was kind of broken up into smaller kingdoms, 2 major dynasties rise up and start unifying huge chunks of the subcontinent. First, you've got the Mauryan Empire, the biggest empire India had ever seen at that point. Then, a few centuries later, the Gupta Empire comes along and kicks off this legendary period of peace and prosperity.
And yeah, people call the Gupta era India's golden age, and for good reason. It was just this incredible time of intellectual and cultural explosion. You have scholars making these revolutionary discoveries in math and astronomy. I mean, the concept of zero, that came from here. At the same time, artists and writers are creating masterpieces that we still talk about today.
And all of this incredible culture wasn't just happening in a vacuum. It was built on some serious economic muscle. Get this, for a huge chunk of this classical period, estimates suggest the Indian subcontinent held about 1/3 of the entire world's wealth. 1/3. That made it an absolute, undisputed hub for global trade.
Now, all this change and prosperity also got people thinking in new ways about spirituality. You have these incredible thinkers emerge, like Mahavira, who really championed Jainism, and of course, Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha. They offered these new paths to enlightenment, focusing on things like nonviolence and personal liberation. And in the process, they founded 2 faiths that would become major world religions.
Okay, so the classical empires eventually fade, but this doesn't lead to some kind of dark age. Not at all. Instead, what you get is this really dynamic and complex medieval period. Think of it like a mosaic of powerful regional kingdoms, with all sorts of new cultural influences starting to arrive.
So for hundreds of years, India is this tapestry of competing powers. Down south, you have the Chola Empire, which built this incredible maritime force that reached all across Southeast Asia. Meanwhile, up in the north, you have these major dynasties all fighting for control in what historians call the tripartite struggle. And this whole era kind of culminates with the founding of the Delhi Sultanate. This was the first major Islamic kingdom based in India, and it totally reshaped the political and cultural landscape.
But out of this whole medieval mix, one dynasty is about to rise up and create an empire of just staggering wealth and power. They're going to unify the subcontinent all over again and leave behind a cultural legacy that is just breathtaking.
We're talking about the Mughal Empire, founded by Babur back in 1526.
It just grew and grew until it dominated South Asia. You have emperors like Akbar, who not only expanded the empire's borders but also famously promoted this blended culture of Hindu and Islamic traditions. And of course, this all leads to that golden age, under his grandson Shah Jahan, the guy who gave us architectural wonders like the Taj Mahal.
And just like in the classical era, Mughal India was an absolute economic superpower. Seriously, it was the world's manufacturing hub, pumping out something like a quarter of all global industrial goods, its textiles, its luxury items. They were in high demand absolutely everywhere, from Europe all the way to East Asia.
But you know how these stories go. Even the mightiest empires don't last forever. The empire actually hit its largest size under the Emperor Aurangzeb, but his policies also created a lot of resistance. You start to see internal conflicts, and at the same time, powerful new Indian groups, especially the Marathas, who built their own massive empire, start to chip away and really fragment the Mughals' power.
And this growing power vacuum, it created the perfect opening. You had these European trading companies that had been hanging around the edges for centuries. Well, now they saw their chance to turn their business interests into actual political and military control.
And the speed at which this happened is just mind-boggling. In less than 100 years, the British East India Company goes from being just a trading company with a couple of forts on the coast to being the dominant ruling power across most of India. They did it with a mix of everything, treaties, alliances, and when that didn't work, just straight-up military force. Well, after decades of anger simmering over the company's aggressive policies, it all finally boiled over in 1857. It started as a mutiny among soldiers but quickly exploded into huge rebellion across northern and central India. Now, the rebellion was eventually put down, but it was a massive turning point. It was the end of the line for the East India Company. It got dissolved, and India was put under the direct rule of the British Crown, kicking off the era of the British Raj.
So, this period of direct rule, the British Raj, it marks the final chapter of colonialism, but it also lights the fire for a unified 90-year-long struggle for freedom.
And that road to freedom was a long one. It started with political organizations like the Indian National Congress. Then it was completely transformed by Mahatma Gandhi and his whole philosophy of non-violent resistance. You also had the All-Indian Muslim League pushing for a separate state. And then, after more than 2.5 million Indian soldiers served in World War II, independence finally happens in 1947. But it came with a terrible, terrible cost: the brutal partition of the subcontinent into India and Pakistan.
So, if you found this whirlwind tour of Indian history interesting, you should definitely check out our Quick Country Histories playlist for more explainers just like this one. And hey, while you're at it, don't forget to subscribe to Notebook Summaries.
You know, when you look at it all, from the Indus Valley all the way to its modern democracy, India's story is just one of incredible resilience and constant reinvention. It's a place forged by millennia of empires and ideas. And it leaves you with one big question: what on earth will its next chapter hold?